And welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that never lets a good opportunity go to waste. So, today, let's resume our little ongoing history of VHS subseries. And I've noticed something. In all the reading I've been doing, digging around online, digging around YouTube, it appears that as of my making this, nobody has ever attempted to cobble together a history of the Super VHS or SVHS quasi format. So, opportunistic little monkey that I am, today let's devote this entire installment to just SVHS. And believe it or not, there's quite a bit to talk about, so let's get to it. Before we begin, there are two terms that you're going to need to know for today's episode to make sense. If you're already familiar with this stuff, it'll only take a minute. Just bear with me. Anyway, with the context of today's episode in mind, luminance, or luma, or the Y carrier, the level of brightness, read black and white, in a signal. Chrominance, or chroma, or the C carrier, the level of color in a signal.
The Sony Super Beta Hi-Fi is the video cassette recorder that the experts say is 20% sharper than all others. For a limited time only, your Sony dealer has a 2-month subscription offer to First Choice Super Channel with your Sony Super Beta Hi-Fi.
As we discussed in Volume 2, in 1985, Sony attempted its latest one-up on JVC's VHS with Super Beta, which could deliver up to 290 lines of horizontal resolution, as opposed to the normal 240 for VHS and B2 and B3 Betamax. Super Beta marked the first real stab at raising the picture quality of an existing consumer video format. Given that the format wars were still in full swing in 1985, it should come as no surprise that JVC felt a need to retaliate.
When it comes to home computers, the Atari home computer gets high grades.
I use an Atari at home, and I use it for word processing and to teach myself other programming languages.
The impetus behind SVHS largely stemmed from a fairly recent development in computer monitors and computer hookups. In 1979, the Atari 800 home computer adapted a system using a 5-pin DIN connector that used 2 of its pins to separate the luma and chroma signals. In 1986, Apple Computers introduced the Apple Desktop Bus, which used 4-pin mini DIN connectors to allow quick and easy hookup of keyboards and mice. Cobbling together Apple's favored connector and Atari's basic concept, JVC created S-Video. S-Video is kind of the walking, talking definition of an intermediate level video signal. On the one hand, you've got composite video, which mashes all the video signal into one element. On the other hand, you've got component video, which separates the chroma end of things down into 2 elements, in total 2 for chroma and 1 for luma. S-Video split the difference between component and composite with 2 pins of data devoted to chroma and 2 pins of data devoted to luma. This separate luma carrier, if you will, allowed for the amount of bandwidth to be raised and expanded, read higher and wider frequency, in turn allowing for a roughly 65% increase in image resolution. Having said that, the still combined chroma information didn't allow for any real improvement in color, keeping the chroma levels at only about 1/4 of broadcast TV. The advent of S-Video necessitated a change in videotape stock. To ensure that the greater Luma demands could be fulfilled, SVHS needed a tape stock with a more dense oxide coating. In the end, I guess you could kinda sorta liken the difference between standard VHS and SVHS tape stock to the difference between ferric Type 1 and chrome Type 2 audio cassettes, the newer formula being more open to more data. Now the great question was, what practical use was there for SVHS? As of 1987, broadcast TV in North America and Japan was only, at best, 330 lines of horizontal resolution, so a fair chunk of SVHS's potential 400 plus lines of resolution were wasted with off-air recordings, and broadcast TV's extra chroma information wasn't going to get captured anyway. Cable boxes and satellite receivers wouldn't start getting S-Video capability until the 90s. As of 1987, only a few monitors, as opposed to traditional TVs, were equipped with S-Video. Only a precious few high-end Mitsubishi TVs would start seeing S-Video capability in 1988, and S-Video wouldn't go mainstream on TVs until at least the mid-90s. The movie studios weren't interested in releasing anything on SVHS. As far as they were concerned, Laserdisc was the videophile, video geek format. Professional users weren't gonna like the limited chroma information, which was weaker than Betacam, Betacam SP, and most, if you will, flavors of U-matic. But having said all that, there was one major plus to SVHS. It was 100% backward compatible with standard VHS, both in playback and recording. Granted, it didn't make your standard VHS look much better, but at least you didn't have to worry about needing a second VCR. Regardless, JVC wasn't going to be able to market SVHS on such a relatively small selling point, so the best they could do was wait for the camcorders, released in late 1987, and gun for the high-end home video and low-end production markets, and just hope for the best.
Can you tell us just the features? I'm buying one.
I can't find anything definitive, but it appears that JVC first announced SuperVHS, or SVHS, at the January 1987 Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Regardless, true to form, this new pseudo-format was initially released only in Japan. In this case, in April of 1987, with the JVC HRS7000. This VCR retailed for 220,000 yen, equivalent to over 263,000 yen, or nearly $2,500 in 2020. Here in the US, we were given the JVC HRS7000U, which was introduced either in the late summer or early fall of 1987 and retailed for $1,200. Upon launch, 2-hour tapes retailed for around $20 each. Placing SVHS further into the zone between home video and professional video, the HRS7000 and variants was a bit of an odd duck. Having been released with really nothing to use it with, this unit hid its S-Video input under a false faceplate. It also operated much more like an editing unit, with loads of picture and audio adjustments and potential editing markers built into a flap on the front of the machine. The second SVHS deck, the HRS8000, introduced in 1988, only somewhat streamlined things. Oh yeah, and added some wood paneling. Bizarrely enough, despite the unsurprisingly lukewarm reception to SVHS, Sony felt the need to push itself and their Betamax into the picture one last time. Despite Sony's claims to the contrary, seemingly as if to simply prove that they could, within a few months of the Japanese introduction of SVHS, Sony introduced its final consumer-y variant of their Betamax format, EDI Beta, or Extended Definition Beta. Introduced in roughly October of 1987 in Japan and roughly June of 1988 in the US, EDI Beta played by the same rules as SVHS. It needed a richer tape stock, in this case metal oxide. You could also use Betacam SP tapes if you liked. The system took advantage of the S-Video standard, and it was 100% backward compatible with standard and Super Betamax. Unfortunately, it also shared the same lack of chroma information as SVHS, and the price was well ahead of SVHS. While the Japanese units sold for the same 220,000 yen as the SVHS, by the time it landed in the US, the price started at a little below $2,000. Tapes retailed around $30 each. And the Sony EDC55 camcorder sold for a staggering $7,700. Granted, Betacam SP camcorders started around $12,000 at the time. Also like SVHS, EDI Beta did some things almost too well for the time. The chief example being it's up to 500, or according to some sources, 550 lines of resolution. To put this in perspective, DVD would peak at equivalent to 410 lines, and PAL region Laserdisc peaked at 440 lines. Anyway, Sony backed itself into an even worse corner than JVC had with SVHS. Even with a $1,500 to $2,000 camcorder, at least SVHS was within the reach of wedding photographers and high school AV departments. EDI Beta was simply too much for amateurs and too little for professionals. Well, sort of. EDI Beta was discontinued in the US in 1990, but I have read anecdotally that EDI Beta caught on as a professional format in the Middle East, lasting into the 2010s. Yes, a handful of movies found their way to SVHS. In the end, probably somewhere between 100 and 150 of them. To the best of my research, all commercially available pre-recorded SVHS tapes were made by the elusive SuperSource Video, based out of San Francisco, California. The first titles were announced in the spring of 1988, the initial line consisting entirely of public domain titles and scenic videos with new age soundtracks. I can't find so much as a picture of a single one of these early tapes. Anyway, according to SuperSource president Hamilton Bryan, his vision was for SuperSource to be what Mobile Fidelity was to LPs and CDs, an upscale, higher fidelity alternative for the, in this case, videophile crowd. In 1989, SuperSource was able to secure the rights to a few major, mostly Paramount and Orion titles, most notably RoboCop, which you could pick up for a mere $89.95, or get for free with the purchase of a new Mitsubishi HS423UR SVHS deck. To the best of my research, the last new SVHS titles were released in 1992, with the last remaining stock cleared out in 1994. These days, if you can find a SuperSource title on Fleabay, be prepared to pay a pretty penny for it. In 1987, Sony introduced DAT, or digital audio tape. Problem was, like just about everything Sony did, it was 100% proprietary, and could only store 2 channels of audio. However, that same year, seeing the similarities between DAT and SVHS tape stock, Alesis founder and resident inventor Keith Barr went to work on an expansion of/alternative to DAT. In 1991, Barr unveiled ADAT, or Alesis Digital Audio Tape, which began shipping in early 1992. ADAT was a digital audio recording system that allowed up to 8 tracks of audio on a normal SVHS videotape. The unique thing about ADAT was that multiple machines could be linked and automatically synchronized, 16 machines to be exact, allowing for up to 128 track recording. In its day, ADAT was the perfect midway point between 4 and 8 track analog tape consoles and full-blown 24 to 48 track analog and digital consoles. The going rate of a 24 or more track digital console was north of $100,000 at the time. Meanwhile, each 8-track ADAT was only about $4,000. Granted, ADAT was incredibly touchy, and the slightest difference in calibration caused playback problems between different machines, but it worked well enough for the time. ADAT largely gave way to hard disk recording by the early 2000s. The dates get a little hazy here, but there were 2 major stabs at not necessarily making SVHS better, but making it more accessible. No later than 1998, JVC unveiled both SVHS ET, expansion technology, and SQPB, SuperVHS quasi-playback, both designed to expand at least some of the benefits of SVHS to standard VHS machines and tapes. SQPB allowed SVHS tapes to be played on equipped standard VHS decks. The great issue with SQPB was, while it did mean the difference between discernible video and a streaky earth-toned blob, the now discernible video was wobbly and soft-focused. But I guess it was better than nothing. I admit, I have to do some serious mental gymnastics to justify this one's existence.
New home-style chicken strips, so delicious. The strips or the sauces?
Big all-white meat strips.
The more noteworthy crack at greater SVHS accessibility was easily SVHS ET. Now, one of the great parlor tricks of the owners of the original 1987 to 97 SVHS decks was trying to cut costs by drilling a hole in the appropriate spot of a standard grade standard VHS tape to fool their machines into thinking that they'd inserted a proper SVHS tape. Never mind that the quality wouldn't be up to snuff with a real SVHS tape. SVHS ET allowed users to record quote-unquote SVHS on standard VHS tapes that would be compatible with all standard VHS decks. The quality is about halfway between standard and Super VHS. And to briefly address an internet popular rumor about SVHS ET, the majority of these decks can record full SVHS. They do not top out at SVHS ET. Turn the damn ET button off and check the menu for what signal is going into the inputs, and of course use a real SVHS tape. Now, yes, there are some low-end models that top out at recording in ET mode, like the ones that don't have S-video inputs, but I think 90% of this rumor stems from good old user error.
But he was looked up, 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 but he was looked, but he was looked up, but he was looked, but he was looked up.
I always like to give a definitive ending to my little history lessons, but despite my best efforts, I can't really do that this time. Unlike the end of standard VHS, there was no fanfare, no press, just a format that quietly faded away. Here's the best of what I've gathered. The last new model of SVHS appears to be the JVC HR S9911 SVHS ET unit, which was introduced in 2002. The last JVC SVHS decks probably rolled off the line at the end of 2005. The D-VHS format, which we'll tackle in Volume 4, was backward compatible with SVHS and made as late as 2005 as well. As for the tapes, my best guess is they were discontinued around 2008, when JVC pulled the plug on all standalone VHS machines and most general support for VHS ended. This has got to be one of those ultra rare archive episodes where, dare I say, I have possibly walked away with a little less appreciation of the day's subject matter. I mean, prior to this episode, I really thought SVHS was kinda cool. I mean, supposedly almost laserdisc quality on almost normal VHS. But I think the real problem was that I just hadn't spent enough time with it. And I certainly got to spend my quality time with it making this episode. As you've seen, I have managed to cobble together some original SVHS footage. But in dealing with it, I just couldn't escape feeling that it seemed a little unnatural, a little saturated, even by VHS standards. But I think I know why. Counterintuitive as it sounds, I think it's a weird little side effect of the extra luma. Or I'm just going completely crazy. But one thing I am sure of is that SVHS really was just another one of those weird little offshoots of the whole VHS Beta format war thing. It's just that for whatever reason, JVC decided to run with this one. The great occupational hazards of doing archive. But anyway, there is only one more chapter to go of this whole history of VHS thing. But in the name of my own sanity, I think I'm going to go back to doing some more standard archive stuff for a while, but we will finish this up at some point. But otherwise, that is it for today's archive. Join me next time when some hypersensitive former 1990s high school AV club geeks get together and have a little Oddity archive merchandise burning. All because of my preceding comments on SVHS. Whatever, I mean, they've already paid for it.
9.